Welcome to our event. Don't forget, by the way, that if you're a member, you need to share the link with other people. We're always trying to grow our community. We want as many people as possible to come on to these events. It's all about career development. And I'm absolutely thrilled that we've got Jonty here today because, as you know, I think understanding what's happening in the market, this is going to be a UK market perspective. I think it's really important because if we're going to plan our careers, information is power. And so understanding what's happening. So today, Jonty's going to talk about what's driving demand. If you're hiring, how you can access different talent pools. But of course, if you are job hunting, you need to be thinking about, am I in those different talent pools? How to describe the role, how different role titles are interpreted, and that's really important on both sides, interviewer and interviewee. And one of the things you'll find me talking about when I talk about interviews is to explore that subject. And he's going to give us some guidance on salary and daily rates. What I'll do is I'm going to get into the practicalities then around interview questions, again, from an interviewer and an interviewee perspective, just to sort of keep it fair and to really make it clear, maybe some of the things to be thinking about ahead of the interview. So without further ado, I will give as much suggested content as I possibly can, but I'm going to hand over to Jonty. First of all, Jonty's going to give you a brief description of his role in life, and then I'm going to be driving the slides for him, so I should do my absolutely best to represent those correctly. Jonty, tell us a little bit about you.
Lovely. Thanks, Melanie. And yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be partnering with you on this event. And it's great to see some familiar names on the attendees list as well. So for those who don't know me or haven't met me, my name's Jonty. I've been working in change management recruitment for the last 15 years. Started my career in the UK, then spent 9 years over in Australia. And I've been back in the UK now for 2.5 years. But in that time, I've worked with hundreds of organisations to help build and grow their change capability, be that in central practices or on programs of work. And for those who are familiar with the Australian market, maybe some aren't, but generally speaking, when it comes to change management, it's typically a more mature market. And I don't mean to cause anyone offence by that comment, but I've now been back in the UK for 2.5 years, and I'm really excited to see change management as a profession growing. Organisations, and I'll talk about it in my slides, but organisations realising they are undercooked in change management, wanting to get better, but maybe don't know how. And I see a gap with my experience, my network, and my knowledge from the Australian market to help come in and partner with those organisations. So after a number of years with a large corporate recruitment agency, I've set up on my own this year to focus purely on the change management market here in the UK. I'm literally end of week 5 in startup life, and yeah, so far so good, and I've been really pleased by the reaction from the market. And again, I'll come on to talk about some of the demands, but it's great to see change is on the agenda. It's on the words of it's on the lips of executives. People are talking about it, which is what we want. I mean, again, I'll come on to talk about it, but there still are those pressures from a cost point of view that may impact the demand. But overall, we're on a positive upward curve from a change point of view. So as I say, delighted to be here.
It's encouraging to hear that, but I think many of us in the community would also say we have a long way to go, I think, in explaining in very simple terms what the value is of change management to those who don't really know what change management is all about. And I think that's something that keeps coming up in the change capability community. And again, I think we've got another session in March to talk about that. But we really must be thinking about, how are we getting our message across? We will have a think about that as we go. But I'll let you tell us about what's driving demand for change. Perfect. And perhaps would you like me to put these up individually, or would you like to see the whole slide all at once?
Individually is fine, thank you. So I mean, first of all, might not come as a surprise to many, but technology focus continues to drive demand. So be that big ERP program, so SAP, ECC, I think they've extended out the support end date, but still there are a lot of organisations that are transitioning from the old SAP platform onto S4HANA, and that's common across a number of different sectors. So, but alongside ERP programs, what's been great to see is the emergence of emerging technologies such as AI and tools that organizations across many sectors and industries are adopting, and then on the backdrop of that, looking for change professionals to help them adopt those tools, which I sometimes find quite interesting, because the reality is no one really is an expert at AI at this stage, let alone a change manager. But we have seen a nice demand there. And if you go to the next point, Melanie, that links on to data. Oh, next point, Melanie, sorry. There you go, perfect. Obviously, with AI and the various bots and chat GPTs, etc., that are out there, there's a huge amount of data. There's a huge amount of risk for organizations putting their data into these tools. And so the demand for change professionals to help manage companies' data and what's going in, what's coming out has been evident to see. Mergers and acquisitions now, we're probably coming off the back of 12, 18 months where this has been a bit slow, but there still has been some meaty stuff happening. I mean, and I would say we are primed this year to see more of that in the market. And so clients bringing in people or change professionals to help with that sort of post-merger integration has been evident in the market.
I would say that when I was doing a session recently, you could divide the room. There were half the change initiatives, and this was a representation of many firms in the room. You could divide it in half. Half of them were doing restructurings, a lot of which was efficiency driven. The other half were doing M&A. They're doing growth. And so looking for a well worked out change routine for how do you explain to an organization that's been acquired, how do you involve them in the acquiring organization? How do you align processes on both sides? How do you build out often a change agent network of those from the acquiring company who can actually drive the explanation of those changes down across all of their colleagues? And it was really interesting. Honestly, it was halfway down the room, 20 on one side, 20 on the other, either restructuring for efficiencies or it was growth through acquisition, and how would we manage those changes. So interesting to hear you say that.
Regulatory compliance, very obviously common financial services, but the pressures that are still coming downstream in this is definitely driving demand in those spaces. And the next one. I mean, a lot has been said around employee wellbeing engagement. I mean, especially there's lots of noise on LinkedIn or various platforms that started this year around hybrid working. Are we in the right rhythm? Are organizations in the right rhythm? I chatted to someone the other day. It's crazy to think that COVID was 5 years ago. But I think a lot of organizations are still trying to find their feet in terms of what works best for them. And there's lots of, and the thing is, it's a very emotive topic, and everyone's got different opinions on it. But having change practitioners who can help with that sort of operating rhythm or hybrid versus office-based rhythm, there's been plenty of that. Portfolio change management as well. And as I said at the start of the call, what's been great to see is with many organizations that I work with, that change management is becoming more common. We're seeing more centralized change practices, permanent change practices being set up and established, which where I'm sat is absolutely fantastic to see. And now we're seeing more of a focus on portfolio change management and even single view of change management. So how can organizations track this? All the changes that are going on, how can they bring it together? And look, we've still got a long way to go on this, and lots of organizations will admit that. But I think we will start to see, well, an increase in demand of how change professionals, especially at the more senior end, can map out change at a portfolio view and at an enterprise level.
I think that's very true of what we're seeing in a lot of our conversations, is the recognition that in order to be able to manage change, you have to have some view of the portfolio. If it's not done centrally and it's not clearly understood in the organisation, that shouldn't stop you having that ability for yourself, and so that you can map what's happening around you. We can no longer talk about an individual change. We have to talk about our change in the context of all the other changes that our stakeholders are experiencing. So from a stakeholder experience perspective, a change professional must always be thinking what's happening to them. And we know that they're being pulled in all sorts of different directions because there are lots of changes happening. I spent time this week to an organisation that does does not have portfolio management, but the people responsible for, in fact, it was an S4HANA implementation, but there are other adoptions of big platforms going on, particularly they were looking at Workday. From an HR perspective, they were doing something else from a CRM perspective in marketing. And I was saying, how are you drawing those together yourself? There might not be a central portfolio management function, but as a change professional, you need to understand what portfolio management is. You need a way of achieving it for yourselves, even if you don't have centralized support. So I think the skills are there, even if organizations are slower to adopt what is fundamental, I think, for change at the moment.
And we're starting to see, well, it's not new, but change fatigue. And again, if you think what's happened since COVID and the amount of change that has been, I guess, forced upon the workforce, and then you add technology, you add digital, you add the regulatory stuff, you add the target operating model change. I mean, change fatigue is here and is very real for many organizations. So, yeah, I guess that how organizations deal and cope with that with their change practitioners is very front of mind. But
I think in an interview question, that's always a good one to raise about if you're taking a job, asking, the hiring organisation a little bit about its volume of change, its likely level of. Well, you've talked about fatigue. I tend to reframe it, Jonty, and I tend to talk about change saturation, because I find that from a neuroscientific point of view, if we use the word fatigue, it kind of implies a blame on the individual. They're tired, they're not good enough. Whereas change saturation really is what we're talking about. There have been too many changes commissioned. Maybe the interdependencies haven't been managed, and actually there is a saturation level. People are feeling overwhelmed. But I always think that's a great question to ask about how is the volume of change in the organisation you're going to go and work for being managed. So if you're an interviewer, maybe that's something to have an answer for. But I'll shut up now while you get on to the next slide.
Okay, just to add, my last point on that slide was what's lovely to see is increased change maturity. As I said at the start of the call, change is very much on the agenda for many. We're starting to see more and more of these centralized change practices and organizations realizing that if they are undercooked in change management, the cost and implications to them. But look, I think we've still got a long way to go. As you said, Melanie, you pointed out earlier, that sort of realizing the value or explaining the value of change management. I mean, it's sort of a no-brainer for me. Why wouldn't you hire a change manager? But for many execs, it's still understanding the value. So you can bring all these points up on at the same time if that's easier. So in this next couple of slides, I guess this is me talking around, right, okay, so you're ready to hire, so you realize you do need a change professional, and it's like, gosh, where do we start? And so some of the points that I'm going to expand on here. So first of all, it's really understanding what your organization's needs are. So are you going through a digital transformation? Is it more cultural shift? Is it structural? Is it reorganization? What about the size and the complexity? So who's impacted? Is it a certain department in your organization? Is it some more an enterprise level? Do you require someone more hands-on, a more tactical approach? What about industry knowledge? So is that going to be essential for this piece of work, or actually is it more the technology that they're going to need? So some basic points there maybe, but just thinking about, right, what are your needs? And then next it's about defining the role and creating a job description. Now, for many organizations, when they're hiring in change, it's almost it's the first time they've done it, so they don't have, or HR might not have a guideline for you to follow. And if you wanted to have a guideline, if you drop me an email after, I'm happy to share. But I guess to start with, we're going through the responsibilities. So what are they responsible for? Change impact assessment, stakeholder management, communication, training, what's in scope, what's out of scope, and then going through the key skills that is needed for the role, the experience and the requirements, qualifications. So do they need ProSci, agile experience? What would you want your change practitioners to come with? And then what about cultural fit? And this is quite hard because this is difficult to put down on paper. But what sort of softer skills would you want from your change practitioner? So you've got your job description. and now it's about going through targeted recruitment channels. Now, we'll just go back, Melanie, just that other slide. Sorry. There you go. So look, this will depend on your organisation and what the process is. So do you have what sort of strategies do you have from a recruitment point of view? But it's going ideally with an organisation or recruitment consultant or firm that understands change management. Have they had experience of working with change practitioners? Do they have the networks? Do they have the community? But also, have they had the track record of helping organisations to do that? Job boards, websites. I mean, LinkedIn. I did a webinar last week actually where I talked a bit about LinkedIn, and I think LinkedIn has done lots of fantastic things for the recruitment world and the sort of networking, but also at the same time, LinkedIn can make it quite transactional. So it's very easy to apply for a role now on LinkedIn. As a result, organizations were starting to see get hundreds of applications for roles, and because it's so easy to apply just by a click of a button. So I'm not saying LinkedIn is a negative, but I think just working out where you're posting your jobs and what you're utilizing, and then the professional networks. So reaching out to your professional networks, but also going to the sort of change community networks. There's lots out there. I think there's still lots to be done in the change community, which I'm excited to be part of. But I think there's still lots there that you could go and sort of utilize to look at getting the right practitioners.
We do have people who want to post their jobs on the change capability community, and I always say yes, why not? If it's a change related role, and it's a community of people who are clearly very interested in change, so it is the best place to be posting it. So I think it is thinking about the use of those groups, and if you're an active member of a group and you want to find a resource, I often find, because I'm asked all the time, I'm also asked if I will sort of circulate around my network or whatever. But at the same time, I find that there just isn't in the sort of quite the description of the job really isn't there. The reasons why you want to do it isn't there. But I'll turn to Annabelle, who's got a question for you, Jonty.
I beg your pardon, user error. I pressed the wrong mistake. Sorry.
No worries.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. So you've got your job description. You've now sort of posted it and sort of engaged with the right channels to find people, and you've sort of sifted through your applications, and now it's about assessing the skills and experience. So and again, some sort of basic points just to tick off here, but going through their past experience, has the candidate led, or is it more they've supported changes? And this will come back, and I'll talk to some of the different levels of change management, but it comes back to your requirement, like, do they have the skills either at an enterprise level, or is it that you're looking for a more junior resource who's supported? So just checking the wording on the CVs. What about the methodologies? So have they used your change methodologies? If they aren't mandatory, have they used others that could slot in? The sort of problem solving and adaptability as well. I mean, people in the audience will know that as a change manager, you're expected, I guess, especially in the current climate, to wear multiple different hats and problem solve, adapt to the situation. So there's no such, and this is quite hard as well, because there's no such linear, this is what a change manager does. I mean, the reality is in so many different organizations, it's so broad. So when you're assessing the skills of the person in front of you, how are they able to cope with the problem solving, adaptability? And then lastly, stakeholder management. And again, this is really something you can only tease out at an interview, and Melanie, you might talk about this when you talk about some of the questions, but every change manager will put on their CV that they're excellent at stakeholder management or excellent at communication. So it's the right, well, give me some situations and let's test the level that you've worked at. Let's test the sort of, that sort of, do you know what I mean? That sort of experience at different levels.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be talking about some of the practicalities there. But one thing I will say is, again, from the hundreds of people I talk to every week, it's very interesting now that if we start from that position, that in fact, whatever we're doing in change, we're working in quite a difficult environment because there are multiple simultaneous changes happening. And so when it comes down to what skills are you looking for, certainly there's a sort of a view brewing up at the moment that does this person understand how to manage through that multiple simultaneous change? And so you mentioned ProSize ADCAR method earlier on, but I think that there's a joke running around more senior leaders in change at the moment, which is that if you know what you're talking about, you would say ADCAR is an interesting method, but it's a very linear method, and it treats the situation as we're dealing with one change at a time, as if people are not being affected by other things. But if you really know your stuff, you sort of say, well, those kinds of models, because ADCAR is like an N-step model, just like Kotter's 8 steps or Lewin's unfreeze, change, refreeze, they have their place. But actually what we're looking for more is possibly skills around emotional intelligence, neuroscience, agility, and portfolio management, and how you bring all of that together to be able to navigate through multiple simultaneous change. So it very much depends on what you're hiring for and how much you can afford to pay people. But just if you've got quite a simplistic approach, that would have to be a junior role, that the person is able to cope with that particular change that's quite well defined in scope and those that are impacted by it. But as soon as you get into more complex changes, which bring in more upstream and downstream impacts and more stakeholders to manage, you've got to seriously question if they're going to follow a simple methodology. Are they the right person for the circumstances? I'll move you on.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then so we get to the interview, and again, I'm not going to cover too much on here because Melanie, I know you're going to give the audience some of your tips, but I guess it's being prepared for the interview, situational based questions. Tell me about a time when you led this, or what strategies did you ensure to make it sure it's a success? Describe a time when you faced resistance to change. I mean, there's plenty of questions that you can tease out at an interview. How did you measure success on a change initiative? And again, this goes back to the sort of understanding the value that a change manager can bring. And I think a good change practitioner is able to articulate that at interview. Essentially, I mean, look, interviews as well, and it'll come down to personal preference and I guess the sort of process that you follow with your organization. But I am a big advocate of the face-to-face interview for your change practitioner to really draw out those softer skills and those things that you can't get from someone behind a screen or over video.
I think these days I want both, because I want to know that they can hold their own on a screen. But at the same time, you're right, I'd feel a warmth and a connection if I've actually met the person. And I think if you're making a decision, guys, if you get the opportunity to go for a face-to-face, you're more likely to build a connection, and therefore more likely to be offered the job. Would you say, Jonty?
Yeah, indeed. And a lot of clients do maybe do a video to start with, and then we'll do.
Where's Gail?
I think somebody's not on mute, so I'll just have a quick look and see if I can put them on mute.
And I was just saying, a lot of clients do choose to do a video first and then a face-to-face for a second round. But I think the balance is a good one. A couple of points, I guess, just to consider. So once you've sort of are in that interview phase, is the first one, testing their strategic thinking. So as a lot of people in the audience will know, good change manager is able to sort of link what they're doing on that certain project to the strategic overview of where the business is going. So and again, it depends on the level of the change practitioner, I will say, but thinking about how they can link that together. The cultural fit as well, and again, this is where I will advocate a face-to-face interview, because I think it's quite difficult to get the cultural fit over a video call, but also for the person on the other side of the room or the video, that they would want to see that actually that organization, your organization, is right for them from a cultural point of view. And that's really important that you get that right, that the person coming in understands the company values, the missions, can work with your senior leadership team, but also work with the frontline employees. So it's not, I spoke a bit about senior execs, but again, people on the call will know that a good change practitioner is top to bottom, so they can be able to have conversation with the senior execs, but also they're able to work with the frontline staff equally as effective and to get the best results. And I think a couple. Sorry, just lastly there, Melanie, a couple of last points. My advice is on this is stay open to diverse backgrounds. I mean, as I said, I've been working in change recruitment for the last 15 years. What's really interesting for where I'm sat is seeing change practitioners come from so many different walks of life. I've got a blog that I'm posting next week, which talks around the benefits and the sort of well, the pros and cons, but people from HR backgrounds, people from project management backgrounds, people from finance backgrounds. I mean, yeah, practitioners come from lots of different backgrounds, and I think what makes a good or less good change manager really depends on what your organization is looking for. So I think staying open to diverse backgrounds is important there. And then just lastly, the offer. So just thinking around what it is that you are offering that change professional other than the sort of monetary, this is your salary and here's your bonus. If you look at what people are wanting in the market, is definitely, well, money's definitely a factor, but it's that progression. It's that, well, not just career progression, but enhancement in skills. So what training do you offer? Where does change management sit in your organization? What is the level of that you've got? And again, I'll come on to talk about levels, but particularly so if you're taking change professionals out of somewhere like a management consultancy firm, where for people on the call, that they'll know that it's very well laid out for you. You're a consultant, and you progress your career can progress your career very quickly. And so when those people move into industry, they typically want the same. So right, what's your career pathway for your change professionals, and what can you offer them other than just this is your salary and these are our hybrid working policies? So really thinking about that. Yeah, perfect. So a bit here on increasing your reach, and I guess this is my advice of how to sort of do that basically. So let's start with day rate contracting. So hopefully everyone on this call is familiar with IR35 and the implications of inside versus outside. But I guess it's understanding that there are a few of those change professionals who will have made the choice to have set up their own limited company and will only work outside of IR35. So, and this, the control or the determination may all be out of your hands. It may be a HR sort of related topic, but where possible, if you can get the role graded outside of IR35, you will open up your talent pool to a wider audience of those working for their own limited company. Fixed term contract and permanent. Now, fixed term contract has become more and more popular over the last 12, 18 months, I would say. But again, it's thinking about the talent pool that you may well be missing out on. Those who only do day rate contracting or only work outside IR35, but also thinking about, okay, what are you offering on a fixed term contract versus permanent? And again, I appreciate some of these may well be out of your hands, but it's what else can you give to that person that gives them that sort of stability or that career progression that you would typically offer a permanent person, but obviously it's got a start date and an end date. So I'm not saying if you go fixed term contract, you are going to really limit your options in the market, but it's thinking about what else is going to attract that change professional to your fixed term contract versus others, because the reality is that there are quite a few of them, and permanent as well. And again, for AMSAT, it's nice to see centralized change practice investing in permanent change practitioners, because we want to see it growing. But it's like, okay, well, where's the balance? And again, and I talked about in the last slide, but what are you offering your change practitioners from a career point of view to make sure they stick? And I've already talked about this next point, but again, lots of talk around remote, hybrid, office. Like, I'm a big advocate of the balance, and I think as a change practitioner, I think my advice is always to those people on the job market that you need to stay flexible. There are going to be times on projects where it makes sense for you to be in the office, to be at the coalface with those who are impacted by the change. But reality is, if you're going to widen your talent pool here, increasing your reach, it's having that flexible approach to the office versus home. I mean, 2 to 3 days a week is typically where we see it. It's really interesting that 2 to 3 is a big jump, or seems to be a big jump. Yeah, so I think it's just understanding there. And then lastly, where does change management sit? And again, in my 15 years in recruitment for change professionals, it's been so interesting to see change sit in so many different places: HR, finance, centralized, decentralized. But it's important when you are going to market is understanding that your proposition or how you sort of position that to the candidates and where change sits and how it's profiled across your business.
And that links to your next points. I think just keeping an eye on the time here.
Oh, yes.
In terms of the career pathway, I'm guessing.
Yeah, indeed. And I've already alluded to this a bit as well, and I'll come on to it. But again, because change is still a relatively new discipline for many organizations, typically I've seen organizations have a very, like, we've got one structure, one level, and that is a change manager. And then so it's like, okay, so when you bring that person in, it's been on the front foot to engage with your HR team to understand, right, what is the progression, versus, because the opportunity cost is you losing someone to go to a senior change manager role elsewhere. So making sure that is nicely laid out. And then I talked about this before, but how can your organizations help those change professionals? Certified versus uncertified. I mean, this is a big topic, divides lots of different people, and there's plenty of certifications out there. And Melanie, I don't know if you want to cover a point here, but I think just being open to different frameworks, different methodologies, different experiences. I don't know if you've got anything you want to comment on.
Being up to date, I think, is one of the first things, because we must recognise that people will look quickly through your LinkedIn profile. And there's a couple of things. First of all, if you haven't educated yourself in the last few years in the change profession, which is continually changing, it sends a couple of messages. I'm not that interested, or I'm quite comfortable with where I am. But basically what it's screaming is that possibly there's a lack of curiosity. I don't think there has to be certification every time, but there certainly has to be some kind of progression and learning. For example, I run masterclasses that people get a digital badge, so there's recognition, and those digital badges hold the metadata for what people have learned. Although I will also say that LinkedIn Learning, whilst free, is often seen as not something where you've sort of really learned anything new. A lot of what's in LinkedIn Learning, I think the way the offering is constructed is it's poor quality. It's probably out of date, or it's very, very light touch and almost meaningless. That tends to be the feedback I hear. So you have to, when you see somebody with LinkedIn Learning, it was a case of, okay, but be careful, that's just dipping your toe into something. But I think it's not so much certified versus non-certified, it's currency, because currency equates to curiosity. And in change, you've got to be curious and flexible and interested, because that's what you're helping others to do. So have you got skills in that area? Are you yourself living the thing that you're expecting your stakeholders to do, really?
Yeah, and then just lastly, and I've talked about this as well, but you as a hiring manager, what are you doing in the change community, in terms of not just sharing stuff on LinkedIn, but being active in networking groups with industry professionals, those sorts of things, so that when you are sat in front of that change practitioner interview, and you can point to some of those points.
There's quite a range here, isn't there?
Well, there is indeed, and putting this slide together, and again, what's interesting from where I'm sat, and I think a challenge, an opportunity maybe for us in the change community, is that there's so many different job titles for change practitioners. I mean, I won't list them all, but change adoption, IT change manager, enterprise change manager, organizational change manager. There's so many popping up and around, and so I think my advice here, and I'm not going to go for everyone, I'm conscious of time as well, but my advice is to think about, right, what do you call in your change practitioners? These typically are the levels that you would see in a change practice. I would say you might have some variations, but then it's around going through what is expected at that different level, or those different levels. And now I'm not going to go through every one of them, but typically a senior change manager would be able to maybe sit across a couple of different projects versus a change manager who might be on one certain project. A change lead is probably someone more who's able to look at holistic portfolio or enterprise level. A head of change director is able to work with execs to help sort of put together frameworks, methodologies, best practices, that sort of thing. So it's a bit of a minefield, and I think we've still got some work to do as a community of change to help really standardize the levels, because I think the challenge we've got is a change manager in one organization will be a senior change manager in another organization, or a change manager in one organization will be a change analyst in another. There's some real disparity, which I guess you will get in other professions, but I think as change becomes more popular, common with organizations, we'll start to see a bit more sort of continuity or sort of levelness across the board. We've got a question there. Is that a question or
I can't see a
observation?
question. No, I can't see a question, but I will make one comment. I think this also leads on to the career progression opportunities. So whatever the title you're offering, you've got to think about. And if the person then asks, well, where's the opportunity to progress in this role? You've got to think, well, actually, do I have an answer to that? And that would be one of the things to consider.
Yeah. And that was Nina just agreeing with me. So thank you, Nina. But yes,
right.
it is a minefield. Right, I'm conscious of time. So so market rates. Now I'll start by saying these are fairly broad. I've tried to cast my net to a wide audience of public sector, private sector, different geographies across the UK. But these are the sort of market rates typically you would pay permanent candidates.
Is it fair to say that the public sector was on the lower side and the private sector was on the higher side?
Generally speaking, yes. Yeah. And then if you flick onto the next slide, I've put the contract rates. Now these are rates to the candidate and outside of IR35.
Are you seeing an increase, a decrease, or is there stabilisation in the market at the moment?
Probably overall it's sort of stable. I mean, as I think where we have seen demand, or where demand outstrips supply, we've seen rates go up. Obviously, saying like regulatory compliance, or I don't know, change practitioners with certain niche technology experience can still command pretty high day rates.
So S/4HANA is and experience of running that kind of change at the moment would command more of a premium.
I would say so, yes. If you've got that experience, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
But okay. Permanents have stayed fairly flat over the last 12 years. 12 months.
Okay. All right, so that's interesting. What I'm seeing in the market is that perhaps the number of jobs is not there. The rates may have stayed stable, but I certainly in the autumn and winter, I saw a lot of change teams being let go. And I think that's been the issue. So are the roles there? But Harish has got a question. Over to you, Harish.
Hello there. Hello, hello, Jonty. Hello, Melanie. Hello, rest of the team. So on the other roles, I also must add business analyst or lead business analyst, who are quite often work on change, although the title is different. Necessarily, the title may or may not have the word change, but as a business analyst, I have always worked on change, mergers and acquisitions, technology, like convergence of two large systems, whatever they are, because of the mergers, etc., etc. So I thought of just adding that small bit for the convenience and to let the wider audience know. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I would always say that my ecosystem for change always includes business analysts. I think we then stray into things like program management roles. So sometimes you're a program manager, but actually what you're doing is mostly change. So I agree with Jonty. I just don't think that we've really defined. It's an argument we've lost, and we're a young profession, but it's something that we're not that good at defining. So I think you have to be careful as an interviewer or the person who's putting the role out there and an interviewee to accept that maybe that's a conversation to explore. fairly early on in the interview, because what you think the role might be and what it might be, might not align to your role title. So be flexible if you're applying for roles. Don't pigeonhole yourself merely as a particular role. Take each one on its merit. Any comment on that, Jonty?
Well, I think hybrid change manager is a term that's used a lot by my clients. I need a hybrid change manager, Jonty. But the reality is that hybrid could be you double hat as a PM, you double hat as a BA, especially in those low mature organizations. And so it is a challenge for the discipline, for the community, because you sort of, you're asked to wear multiple different hats, as I pointed out in earlier slides. And so it is a bit frustrating. Because
I like that phrase,
what is hybrid? Well, yeah, exactly, yeah.
But actually, it's belying the fact that actually what they're asking for is, well, you called it double hatting, but certainly double or triple hatting. You're actually asking somebody to apply many roles. Raghu, over to you.
Is it me?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Melanie. A big fan of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Jonty. Yeah, this is question from US market. I live in US. I want to know, like, what are the contract rates for a US region?
I'm sorry, Raghu, I don't cover the US market, so I wouldn't be able to comment. Sorry.
I think what we could do, Raghu, is put that question up in the LinkedIn group and see if you can get some recruiters who draw them in and just highlight it for our US colleagues. I think you'll get quite a strong reply on that one. So definitely worth maybe doing a screenshot of what these rates are for the UK, and then sort of say, can somebody comment, please, against this for the US and Canada? Because I think that'll be a very interesting question for you to pose in the community, Raghu.
Oh, great. Thanks, Melanie.
Pleasure. I'm going to do some of the practical things, I think, mainly because I'm involved at the sharp end of making sure we're fully crewed on any particular change. So I just thought I'd put some things here in the last 10 minutes about how you actually get the job. And I think if you were here in October when we were looking at another recruiter, we're talking about how to handle interviews, the common theme that they were highlighting was the often a need for you to present at a second interview, perhaps your plan. It might be the plan for the first month or the first 3 months. So I think it's making sure that you have that preparation, that you've got an idea of what it is you're going to be doing. So that would be the first thing I'd look at. I think that in that plan, you need to include measures to track your progress, because we are talking here about how we know that you've been successful. And also, whenever you try to put measures in that show, well, this is how I know we've done this, it really highlights that whatever the activity in your change plan, you've also got an understanding of what good looks like. If you don't know what good looks like, you can't come up with a measure for success. So, and it does highlight also that you're prepared to have your progress tracked. You'll be tracking it yourself. So it gives a confidence to whatever you're saying you're going to do. There's nothing worse than seeing somebody's first 3 months or first 100-day plan, as it's sometimes highlighted, and you get the feeling that there's a lot of busyness there, but what will you have actually achieved? So when you think about putting measures in, you're thinking about that achievement, which leads to this point about including those impactful outcomes that the business will value. In other words, just be aware that if we're hiring for a role at the moment, what we want to see is an outcome. We want to see, well, what did you achieve? Because there may be pressure on the person hiring to make sure that things are actually moving forward. There's so much happening. They need to evidence that what they've done has resulted in something good, some progress. So what is it that you will have achieved? Make sure that your plans aren't just all of the activities you'll go through. Think about, yes, but as a result of what I'm doing. So here's my activities, but for every sort of small group of activities, you can then go and tell me, but as a result of those things, this is what I would have achieved. So we're talking here about when you're starting to launch a change and you're thinking about getting all of the announcements and a lot of the communication activity, early workshops to really investigate the scope, the outcomes would be that there would be a consensus on the specific scope in each of these business areas. You know, it's actually saying, yeah, we would have achieved the consensus here. Yeah, we will start to see that we're getting questions back. So actually, I may have done a lot of communication to set the scene for the change and explain the scope of it, but we know that we're being successful because we're actually receiving in requests for further details and perhaps even opportunities for people to volunteer because they want to take it further. So you're actually thinking, but what does an outcome look like of whatever I'm saying I'm doing? So activities in the plan alongside the outcomes is a very compelling proposition, because as an interviewer, you sit back and go, oh, that's a relief. This person knows what they're doing. I can let them get on with it. So it's very much, you know, your opening bid for empowerment. And also think about the fact that in a world of multiple simultaneous change, that you always work cross-functionally, you're always emphasizing the need to build relationships. You recognize that change has upstream and downstream implications, and that you do look at that bigger picture all the time. Next one is about, in the interview questions, there are common challenges. So it'll be sensible if you've got an answer. Ideally, what you're trying to draw from is past experience, because again, when you're interviewing somebody, you just want to know that you could just hand the work over to them and you know that they're going to be able to do it. That's what we're looking for. So probably the most common, and if you look on the change capability community in LinkedIn, we're often doing polls about the things that we're most worried about, but the one that comes up all of the time, and I'm obviously polling this with people I work with. I've done two courses this week and a big workshop. So I've had about 50 people pass me this week, and top of everything was change overload. They're trying to get their messages across their stakeholders. Their stakeholders have got many competing initiatives, so big impact on those subject matter experts that they want to work with, getting their time. What is it that you do in that situation to enable people to get involved in the change, smooth the path for them to get involved, increase your participation rates? So we want to hear practical things that you have done. You can also describe things that didn't work, because that shows that you've experimented and you've come to a conclusion of things that work and that didn't work, but you've got a breadth of activities you can undertake, and depending on what's right for the situation. Yeah, Harish.
Melanie, thanks a lot. Those are beautiful and fantastic points. So I'm an experienced lead business analyst. I exclusively work in asset and wealth management, and my experience is around 15 months. And I've been looking for a new role from last 6 to 9 months. So I've applied for many jobs and interviewed at few places. But the expectation is, so whenever we interview with a star technique, situation, task, etc.
Situation, task, yeah.
But I see that's not enough, unfortunately. With the competition out there, I think people are looking something different. How to put it through? If they ask me, do you have any questions? Generally, we ask about culture, how they feel about it, etc. But the competition is driving to the next level, and I've asked different questions the other day when I interviewed. What did you learn from your mentors, or what numbers are you interested in, or why are you interested in, and how my role is going to turn into actual value for the organization, as in I'm an indirect contributor to the revenue. I'm not a direct contributor because I'm not an investment banker or an investment advisor. So I'm an indirect contributor. So how am I adding the value to that revenue contribution, and how are you going to support me, and how do you support till dates? How are you supporting currently? And if I get this job, hopefully, and how am I going to support that? So I think these kind of questions are actually dragging more traction and helping the candidates, and I also thought this might help the others as well. So simply going through star method, I think it's great, but at the
But it's
same
not
time,
enough.
I think it's not enough. I only realized it when I was 3/4 way through. Okay, I wasted 6 months of my time. How do I think this differently? Yeah,
Thank you for that.
I'll leave it there.
I think a couple of points. I've just put up the other situation that I think is most common. I won't belabor it because you can all read it, but having an answer for that situation. I think you raise an excellent point about interview questions. I'll answer this and then sort of turn to Jonty for his comments on it. But it brings me to sort of my last slide as I answer this. I've put on some of the most common issues that we possibly have to have an answer for. But I think it comes back to this: prepare your answers to demonstrate structured approach, past experience, clarity of outcomes. So yeah, and that's taking us down that star approach. So let me just address the question. I think you're absolutely right. I want to hire people who've done it before, got great experiences, they've got very practical answers. So clearly they can structure their explanation of what it is they will do in X situation. So they're drawing from that past experience, and as I've said, they can comment on whether something works well or not. I think this also goes to, and the question goes to, a much higher level of professionalism. And I was saying to Jonty before we got on the call, actually, it was talking about in LinkedIn, I get frustrated. It's not just that people haven't perhaps updated their training recently, so they look like they're sort of static and that they haven't progressed themselves, which is frustrating when we're talking about change roles. But also, they're not in. There's no sort of, they might have commented in an article, but that was 18 months ago, or they might have shared a post that was 2 years ago. And so how are you showing, how are you demonstrating that perhaps you're actively involved in your profession? And so are you a member of the different professional bodies? Are you in the LinkedIn groups for those bodies? Are you putting content out there? So are you showing that you regularly read articles because you're saying, oh, I saw this in, well, it could be anywhere, but like McKinsey Quarterly, and I have a view about this. So where's that professionalism? Because I think if you're doing that as a habit, I think that also gives you more to say about yourself. And I think that question, I mean, it is a great question. What have you learned from your mentors, or have you mentored anybody, or do you take part in any kind of community or networking around your profession? So having answers like that, really important. But I'll leave the concluding comments on this to our guest, Jonty.
No pressure there. I think to empathise with Harriet, I think it's it is a very competitive market out there, and lots of organisations are really wanting that sort of practical vertical experience that you can deliver. I think just one point I will add is the use of I rather than we when you're giving your examples. That's where they want to understand what you have done, what you have delivered, what you've been responsible for. And it's quite difficult. I mean, especially for us Brits, we're very bashful at times. We don't like to sort of sing our own praises, but at interview, you've typically got half an hour, 45 minutes to really get your point across. So you need to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. We've got a question as well from Lynn in the chat around organisational development, and I guess the question is, where does organisational development fit in? Very similar to change, really, in that there's probably lots of different homes for it. Now, in some organisations, OD will sit very hand in hand with change. You might find a head of change and OD. Other organisations, it's separate. So Mel, I don't know your experience, but in my experience, there is no common theme. It's sometimes with change, sometimes not, sometimes HR, sometimes on its own. So sorry to sit on the fence, Lynn. I think our organisations are still working out, and I think it comes down to where that organisation is on its maturity levels and that sort of thing?
I think that when we've brought people together who talk about their change careers, you can see that they come from all sorts of backgrounds. So they might have come from project or program management, HR, learning and development, organisational design, business analysis, operational management, where they've sort of fallen in love with making change happen, or IT development. So I think often it's all routes lead to change roles. And I think if you're in organisational design, organisational development, showing how that is a contributor to achieving the overall change, which is the adoption of new ways of working, people working together in new structures. So I think that might be one of the strings to your bow, but I would suggest you widen it out. So it's always making sure that you've got that picture of not, if you like, pigeonholing yourself, because I think change is a very broad church, hence the wide range of job titles that we've got. And I think whenever you say, well, I've come in through this particular route, but actually what I have all the skills and abilities around behavioural change. So across all of the roles, when it comes to making change happen, we are asking people to adopt new behaviours, new habits. And so we are at the sharp end of being able to build relationships, be persuasive, be motivational, be encouraging, create environments of trust, empathy and psychological safety. So it doesn't matter where you've come in from. I think, how do you draw out from your past experience how you make that happen? And if knowing the time as it is, thank you very much. I'll end it on that. But thank you very much to Jonty. It was great to have you with us. We'll get the recording out so that you can share it to others if there are things in here that you particularly found helpful. And we'll see you at the next event, which I'll be posting up very soon, which is towards the end of this month. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you all being here today.